It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Trouble for the Prime Minister as Tory MPs rebel against the Rwanda plan. Two deputy chairmen of the Conservative Party quit, joining dozens of MPs who voted to toughen up the bill to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Also tonight, Fujitsu apologises for its part in the post office scandal and says the company should be responsible for compensating victims.
Fujitsu would like to apologise for our part in this appalling miscarriage of justice. We were involved from the very start. We did have bugs and errors in this.
And I think it's a corporate sorry. I don't think, to me, it doesn't sound sincere from anybody, really, at the moment. It's just they have to be seen to be saying it.
The Vice President of Yemen tells Sky News that he supports the US and UK airstrikes on Houthi rebels as attacks on ships in the Red Sea continue. Trump is back in court today after a record win in Iowa, cementing himself as the Republican presidential candidate frontrunner. And Serena Wiegman tells Sky News she has unfinished business with the Lionesses as she extends her contract as head coach. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. A number of Conservative MPs have gone against the government tonight and backed amendments to the Rwanda bill. The amendments debated in the Commons tonight didn't pass, but the rebellion and the resignation of two deputy chairmen were a blow for the Prime Minister. Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith handed in a joint letter to Rishi Sunak saying they wanted to strengthen the legislation. The Prime Minister said, though, that he still hopes flights to Rwanda will take off in the spring. Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
The ayes to the right, 68. The noes to the left, 529. So the noes have it, unlock.
The PM was never going to lose this vote, but that result hard to hear. 60 of his own MPs telling him his flagship illegal immigration plan doesn't go far enough. Two party vice chairs resigning after siding with the rebels. This MP on the right of the party still thinks there's time to toughen up the bill and find consensus. You know, if the bill falls, then the government could fall, right?
I don't believe the government will fall because the Prime Minister still retains all our support. We want to make sure that we can deliver on this policy, and we firmly believe that a bill very quickly could be brought back in a new form.
But the other side insist there's no room for manoeuvre. What's your message? What's your reaction to that?
I would strongly recommend the government to stand its ground, hold its nerve, and put this bill through tomorrow. And I think they will have the overwhelming support of Conservative MPs in doing it.
Arriving at Cabinet earlier in the day, the splits throwing up awkward questions for ministers.
Morning. Is the Rwanda bill strong enough?
For Rebel leader Robert Jenrick, the answer clearly no.
I am prepared to vote against the bill at third reading because this bill doesn't work, and I do believe that a better bill is possible.
That's quite something, Mr Jenrick. You're saying that you will vote against the bill at the third reading if it is not amended.
Well, I'm prepared to do that, but I hope we don't get to that situation.
In the Commons, many on the right also arguing the bill won't work and leaves migrants avenues of appeal through international law.
If there are those individual claims that are clogging up courts for months or even years, then even if they are not ultimately successful claims, it will automatically weaken the deterrent effect of the bill and of the plan. And of course, the whole purpose of the Rwanda plan is to be a deterrent.
For some, the stakes could not be higher.
Is this legislation the strongest ever? For the record, it is, but it is still likely to prove insufficient. There is a crisis of faith in our politics. Do we, as members of Parliament, mean what we say? Is our word worth anything?
Raising concerns in public, 40 right-wing MPs plotted in Parliament, sending a message to the PM that they are united and organised. Two big rebellions tonight. The Tory psychodrama plays on. But in the end, will Conservative MPs really vote with Labour to defeat their own Prime Minister on his flagship illegal migration plan? Number 10 are betting that they won't. And most MPs I speak to around this place also think that when it comes to it, the government will win the day. But it's too uncertain to say that now for sure. And isn't that a terrible place for a Prime Minister with such a big majority to find himself? Another common showdown tomorrow and a vote the PM has to win. But victory won't bring peace. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, the Rwanda policy was introduced by then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. 2 months later, the first deportation flight was cancelled minutes before takeoff after an intervention by the European Court of Human Rights. It then went through several legal challenges. First, the High Court ruled that the policy was lawful, but a group of asylum seekers scheduled for deportation then appealed. In June, it was ruled unlawful by the Court of Appeal, with judges concluding that Rwanda is not a safe country. So the government appealed to the Supreme Court, who also ruled it was unlawful. Rishi Sunak announced an emergency bill to declare Rwanda a safe country, effectively circumventing the courts. But he's now facing rebellions from MPs in his own party who want the bill amended. Those amendments are now being voted on this week, and even if it passes, it still needs to clear the House of Lords. And even if it makes it through that, some legal experts believe it could be held up by the European Court of Human Rights. Well, Beth Rigby joins us live, and it is a process, Beth, which has certainly been dragging out. And now, how perilous is this policy for the Prime Minister as we await the result of the main vote expected tomorrow?
Well, Anna, it's been a messy and ill-disciplined, a damaging day for a Prime Minister. Those were two big rebellions. MPs giving him a bloody nose, if you like, saying we are not happy with this policy. And it reflects really what you've just been talking about a sort of pessimism amongst those in the parties that this plan is ever going to get off the ground and those planes in the air, and is it going to work? And they really care about it because they're really worried about their seats. They're worried about a general election, and they're worried about lapsed Conservative voters just not coming back to the Conservatives because they feel they're being failed on immigration. But if that is kind of the framing of it, where's the PM tonight? Well, I have to say I've been talking to both sides tonight, and it seems that on both sides there's a growing sense that there is a feeling the Prime Minister will win the vote tomorrow. I can't call it, I simply don't know. But look, this is what I've had from one leading rebel tonight. They've said to me they think that the Prime Minister will be victorious, but they say the question is, what does it profit a Prime Minister to gain a bill but once and for all lose the public's trust on the boats and migration? Another leading rebel says to me that in the end they think it will go through. There's a small chance by accident rather than design the Prime Minister could be defeated. But in the end that this does end up as a confidence vote in Rishi Sunak. And when it comes to it, he thinks that MPs will hold their nose and vote for the Prime Minister. But I do think there's a bigger question here, and there's the question about trust and a question about whether the policy works, because that figure that said to me he'll lose the trust of the public, what they're really saying is, yeah, you might win tomorrow, but in a few months' time, if this policy isn't working, you will have still be having a civil war within your parliamentary party, and the public might be very disappointed in us. One rebel said to me that effectively if this bill goes through, the Prime Minister might as well hand them P45s because they're going to lose their seats because the policy won't work. So victory, yes. Peace in the party, no. And electoral prospects still in doubt.
Beth Rigby, live for us in Downing Street. Thank you. The head of Fujitsu in Europe has admitted that there were bugs and errors in the software, which saw hundreds of people convicted in the Post Office scandal. Paul Patterson has apologised for the company's role in what he called the appalling miscarriage of justice. He was being grilled by MPs today, along with the Post Office chief executive, who said the money taken from victims may have gone into executive pay. And we heard from some of the victims too, the real Mr Bates and Joe Hamilton, the stars of the ITV drama, who were at the centre of the campaign for justice. Sky's national correspondent Tom Parmenter has been following today's evidence and has this report.
It's taken 2 decades. Some victims are no longer here to see it, but the sub-postmasters now have the nation on their side. Joe Hamilton from Hampshire was wrongly convicted of false accounting due to the faulty post office computer system. She promised her late mother she would keep on fighting for justice.
You're responsible for the loss.
I haven't got that money, and I don't know where it's gone.
The other unlikely hero, Mr Bates, whose unbreakable persistence was chronicled in the TV drama, appeared as himself and laid out to MPs why the compensation matters so much.
I was talking to one of the group at the weekend. She's 91 years old. How many more years has she got to wait for financial redress? It is absolute madness, and it's very unfair, and it's cruel.
And so it fell to the current bosses of both the post office and the Japanese tech firm Fujitsu to face the wrath of MPs.
Fujitsu would like to apologise for our part in this appalling miscarriage of justice. We were involved from the very start. We did have bugs and errors in the system, and we did help the post office in their prosecutions of the sub-postmasters.
Alongside him was Nick Reed, the current post office chief executive. He's been in the job for 4 years, but was unable to say when Horizon's problems surfaced.
You must surely have had time in 4 years to cut to the heart of this issue, which is when did the post office know remote access to terminals was possible?
My role, certainly coming into the post office, is to do a number of things. Of course it is to speed up as much as we can and as quickly as we can the compensation that's being paid.
But what's the answer?
I haven't got that specific date.
I think we are both surprised and disappointed that you've not got that question answered on the table.
It's been quite a day. It's not the first time victims have been left insulted by what they've heard from the post office and Fujitsu.
I think it's a corporate sorry. I don't think, to me, it doesn't sound sincere from anybody, really, at the moment. It's just they have to be seen to be saying it, and it doesn't come from there.
The nation has now seen this scandal for what it is, and after years and years of delays, the government has been forced to fast-track justice and find the money for victims. The Post Office Minister has said they want the compensation settled and paid out by the end of August. 200 potential new victims have come forward since the TV drama aired. Nobody can put a figure on how much will be paid out. And every victim knows that no amount of money can put everything right. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
And Tom joins us now live. So admissions and apologies today, Tom, but still compensation and exoneration slow to materialise, with another potential hurdle emerging today.
Yes, I think what we saw today was yet more evidence of why this is such a long, gruelling and infuriating process for all those victims and their families who have waited so long for this to be put right, and to underline why you can't just click your fingers and make this stuff happen. You remember last week the Prime Minister stood up and said that those hundreds of postmasters whose convictions still stand, and it runs into hundreds of them up and down the country, well, they will be exonerated. Well, today in Westminster, in front of another committee of MPs, the Lady Chief Justice, Lady Carr, the most senior judge in England and Wales, told MPs that that process to exonerate the postmasters still hasn't been rubber-stamped. She said she's had 2 short meetings with the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, and any suggestion that the judiciary has given any proposed legislation the green light simply isn't true, she said. And I think that shows perfectly the disconnect that there is between the warm promises made to the victims of this scandal and the reality of delivering on their behalf.
Tom, thank you. The US hit Houthi militants with another airstrike today, saying it has destroyed 4 anti-ship ballistic missiles. Another cargo vessel in the Red Sea was attacked by a missile coming from Yemen as the rebels backed by Iran continue to target ships. It's an issue which has been dominating the discussion at the World Economic Forum in Davos, with fears that it could impact the flow of goods. From there, our economics editor Ed Conway has been speaking to the Vice President of Yemen.
3,000 miles and 5,000 vertical feet away from the southern gate of the Red Sea, the crisis in the world's shipping is reverberating through Davos. Here for the meeting of the World Economic Forum, the Vice President of Yemen telling Sky News that the airstrikes by British and American forces were a welcome intervention.
There won't be any peace without a comprehensive approach against the Houthis, because they're posing the threat to Yemen and the whole region, and this needs the US, the UK and other countries in the region to work together to deter these escalations and weaken them so that they can't create this threat and destabilise the region.
Oil giant Shell, only the latest in a long line of companies saying they're suspending shipments through the Red Sea. And since roughly half of all our goods come via there, the fear is this pushes prices higher. It's shaking the confidence of those meeting here.
Everybody's concerned. We pay for our oil on delivery at our ports. So, yes, there will be people who are delivering who have issues. Some diversion will take place around the Cape of Good Hope. Other will happen.
So far, the events in the Red Sea haven't pushed up energy prices, but economists still worry that the implications could be far-reaching.
Any shock to shipment, Red Sea shock, remember a while ago Suez Canal was blocked. The level of water in many waterways is lower. Any disruptions of that sort may confirm people's priors that supply chains are no longer reliable, that what we need is reshoring, that barriers to international trade no longer matters because we are heading towards a world of 2 or more blocks.
This is a bit of a weird place. You've got politicians, billionaires, campaigners, celebrities, all in the same town having lots of secret meetings that most of us aren't invited to. But if there's one thing that brings pretty much everyone together, it's that they crave stability. And right now, whether it's the Red Sea or Ukraine, there is more and more instability to be worried about.
The Ukrainian president here too for the first time.
Hey, Mr. President, you have a message for people here in Davos?
Thank you for having us. We are thankful to Switzerland that Switzerland supported the peace.
Why is he here? Because, frankly, this is where the billionaires are. It's where the politicians are. And with disorder and chaos closing in from multiple fronts, their attention can no longer be taken for granted. Ed Conway, Sky News, in Davos.
Well, US presidential hopeful Donald Trump says he will be the person to fix the issues in the Middle East and Ukraine. And that rhetoric seems to be working with his supporters as he had a record-breaking win in Iowa last night, pushing him closer to becoming the Republican candidate in this year's race to the White House. Well, Mr. Trump secured 51% of the votes. That is far ahead of the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, who narrowly beat the former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, who had to settle for third place. Vivek Ramaswamy pulled out after securing just over 7% of the vote. But this is just the first test for Republican hopefuls. Next week, it is the New Hampshire primary, followed by another caucus in Nevada on February the 8th, and the South Carolina primary on the 24th. By then, we may well know who the Republican candidate is. Well, then comes Super Tuesday, when 16 states, plus the territory of American Samoa, have their say. And on July the 15th, Republicans will officially nominate their presidential candidate at their convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The winner will face a Democrat, probably Joe Biden, in November's election.
The day after a remarkable night in Iowa, predicted by the polls and yet still, for his supporters and those who shudder at Trump's return, it was a moment to absorb. Inside the state capitol building, the Conservatives are energized.
It was record-setting. I honestly didn't think it was going to be as high as it is.
You want to say something? Brad Zorn was on stage with Mr. Trump hours earlier, a state senator who can claim to be the first politician in the country to endorse Donald Trump back in 2016.
Is he awesome or what? He's a fighter. And what happens is, I think that it really helps him as president. It certainly is a lot of the reasons why people are supporting him, because he loves America. He loves the American people. And, you know, all this, you know, if you remember when he got elected, oh, we're going to be in wars and wars and wars. He's a negotiator. I mean, that's what he did, you know, on his TV show. And that's what he did when he was president.
With a trouncing of his Conservative competitors, his victory speech was familiar, broad-brush stuff, weaving hyperbole with promises to fix the country and the world his way.
We're going to drill, baby, drill right away. Drill, baby, drill. We're going to seal up the border. The Ukraine situation is so horrible. The Israeli situation is so horrible, what's happened. And we're going to get them solved. We're going to get them solved very fast.
In an America where so many on the right feel things are worse, the border, the economy, global security,
In the entire country.
he seems to provide a nostalgia.
It's a responsibility in our democratic republic.
Undeterred by temperatures of below -20, Iowa's Conservatives headed to caucus all over the state.
Narrowed it down to 2 people.
Not all for Trump, but most of those we met convinced that if he prevails as the candidate, even with his flaws, he's got their vote. There is an irony that a candidate accused of ripping American democracy apart prevailed from a process that was democracy at its very simplest: paper, names, counting. Why is what we've just seen tonight so important?
It sets a tone. It says something to the rest of the nation, and it weeds out the unelectables.
From Iowa, it was to New York and another courtroom for Mr. Trump. The courts are where the jeopardy is, but also where his support is boosted. Then to New Hampshire, the next stage in the Republican race next week. It will be tougher, but based on Iowa, not that tough. Mark Stone, Sky News in Des Moines.
Well, this year, more than likely, there will also be a general election here in the UK. But this time, the shape of the constituencies will look a little different due to changes introduced to boundaries, and that could have a bearing on the result. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has all the details.
In December 2019, when Boris Johnson won the election with an 80-seat majority, politically, the country looked like this. Each of these, of course, is a constituency. The colour, the party that won. Lots of Tory blue in England and Wales and lots of SNP yellow in Scotland. But since then, the very map that shapes our democracy has been redrawn. All but 77 of these seats have been changed. The first overhaul since 2010. Now, it's a little tweak here, a small change of a line there, and it's done to ensure everybody's votes are more or less equal. And it does mean that there are more seats in England and fewer seats in Scotland and Wales, but the real difference politically is here. This is what it means. Now, this is the number of seats each party won last time, determining the makeup of our current House of Commons. But under the redrawn constituency boundaries, this would have been the estimated result. What do we see? The Tories would have more seats, 7 more. The Labour Party down 2, Liberal Democrats down 3. And how would that have changed the 2019 outcome? Well, look, at a stroke, the Tories would have won an even bigger majority compared to the previous boundaries, and Sir Keir Starmer would have an even bigger mountain to climb if he wants to seize the crown from Rishi Sunak. Now, this is the first of Sky News' brand new swingometers. And as someone once said, it's just a bit of fun because it presumes everybody in the UK is acting in the same way. It makes a lot of assumptions, but it's still a great tool for understanding what's going on. Let's go through key milestones. Right, 0. The arrow pointing straight down. This is the status quo under the new boundaries. So if there is a 4.2 percentage point swing, then the Tories are going to lose 47 seats. And it means Rishi Sunak doesn't have a majority anymore. And that means he's all but certain to be out of number 10 because no opposition party will work with the Tories. This happens if there's a swing big enough to take Wrexham in North Wales. Sir Keir Starmer would make his claim to be Prime Minister, but it would be a really unstable hung parliament unless there is a swing of 8.3 percentage points and Labour win at least 81 seats, meaning they've overtaken the Tories as the largest party. Now, they'd still be short of an overall majority and need the Lib Dems or the SNP to govern, but it would be more stable. Now, this, a 12.7 percentage point swing, is what Labour needs to be able to govern alone without help, a majority of 2. But that needs 125 Labour gains. But pause here for a moment to concentrate on this winning line. 12.7 percentage point swing for an overall majority of 2. Now look at this. This is every election since the war. It's never happened on that scale. The biggest was in 1945. There you've got it, a Labour landslide after a wartime coalition. Blair's famous 1997 victory, well, you can see it here, that was a 10.2 percentage point swing to Labour. It's a big deal. These are the sorts of seats Labour need to take from the Tories to get a majority. Maybe a little less if the SNP collapse in Scotland and the Lib Dems do well in the south of England, but there's a huge number here. Can Sir Keir Starmer pull it off?
Sam Coates reporting for us there from Westminster. Now, tonight could be the coldest night of the winter so far and could even be the coldest January night for 14 years in some parts of the UK. There's been heavy snowfall in the northwest of England, closing more than 30 schools in Merseyside. More than 100 schools in Scotland were also shut today, with weather warnings in for the next few days. So let's take a look then at those Met Office weather warnings. Yellow warnings for snow and ice in force for the next few days with travel disruption likely. They cover Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland and North Wales. Ice is forecast for many places too. Heavy snow in places with 20 centimetres expected in parts of northern Scotland by Thursday. Now, she's one of the most successful England football managers in decades, and Serena Wiegman has told Sky News she is delighted to be staying with the Lionesses after signing a new contract. She also spoke about the inequalities in football, saying she feels very valued. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris has more.
Serena Wiegman has unfinished business with the Lionesses.
So delighted that I stay a little longer. I see so many potential in this team and in England. So I'm excited about that, and now it takes, we have a little more time to continue that.
Her contract's now extended until 2027. Another shot at the World Cup after coming so close to glory last year, losing the final to Spain.
We did a review, and we want to take the trends out and what we did really well. We always evaluate the games anyway, but now we did the whole tournament, and trying to figure out, okay, what do we need in the future with this team?
Serena Wiegman.
Wiegman's already won the Euros with England, and the personal accolades keep flowing, receiving FIFA's Women's Coach of the Year award for the 4th time on Monday.
There's a lot of focus, obviously, on the gender pay gap in football. How, in your own mind, do you grapple with that?
I feel very much valued, and since I came in, we've got all the facilities that we need to perform at the highest level. We have so much support. And there's growth in everything, also growth in salary. And I'm just really happy with the situation I'm in right now.
Do you wonder when there will be pay parity?
We're not talking about money all the time. It starts we need to invest in the game, in all the parts. And that's what we do. We're going into the right direction and we need to keep moving forward.
Closing the gender pay gap will take time. Eradicating sexism an immediate concern for the FA, with misogynistic abuse targeted at women in football.
What I would say is I find it absolutely unbelievable in this day and age, some of the points being raised and the questions being asked. I think there's huge growth in women's and girls football and also women's and girls sport overall, and a lot of that has been driven by the Lionesses.
And in Serena Wiegman, England believe they have a born winner. The #1 coach in women's football, now staying in the job for even longer. Rob Harris, Sky News, Wembley.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, and the director of the Onward think tank, Sebastian Payne. Welcome to both of you. And among the stories, we will be discussing this on the front of the Financial Times. Their headline, Sunak suffers a heavy blow as a Tory Rwanda revolt swells. That and plenty more when we come back.
2 L's.
Well, this is Sky News in just a moment. Press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories this evening. 2 deputy chairmen of the Conservative Party have quit and were among a number of Conservative MPs who rebelled against the government to support amendments to its Rwanda bill. A senior executive of the IT firm Fujitsu has said it has a moral obligation to help compensate hundreds of sub-postmasters wrongly convicted of fraud and theft. And another ship was attacked in the Red Sea today. The Vice President of Yemen has told Sky News airstrikes against Houthis are a welcome intervention. Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, and the director of the Onward think tank, Sebastian Payne. Welcome to both of you. So, shall we check out the front pages? Let us start with The Guardian. Courtesy of Pippa, the PM faces a revolt on Rwanda plans as senior Tories quit. It follows the resignation of 2 Conservative Party deputy chairmen over the Rwanda migration policy. The Financial Times says Rishi Sunak has suffered a heavy blow following tonight's resignations. The Daily Express has a similar story, reporting on the PM's last-ditch plea. 2 rebels come together on the Rwanda plan. The Telegraph also leading on the Rwanda rebels, while the Times headline reads Sunak hit by resignations and the biggest rebellion yet. The Metro carries a pledge from the European boss of the tech firm Fujitsu to compensate sub-postmasters who were wrongfully convicted as a result of its faulty Horizon computer system. The Daily Mirror also reporting on the apology from Fujitsu with the words, "About time." The Sun features a story about toddler Bronson Battersby, reporting he starved to death next to his father's body. The headline reads, "Why did authorities not save this tragic toddler?" Houston, we have a moron, says the Daily Star, reporting the Space Minster mixes up Mars with the Sun and thinks Jupiter is Saturn. It is a story I missed, but I'm intrigued to find out more, I think. Anyway, scan that QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, and you can check out the front pages for yourself while you listen to our guests. And dominated the papers, Pippa and Sebastian, by the Rwanda revolt. Always very grateful when you rush in, having penned the lead. But anyway, Pippa, was it bigger than anticipated, do you think? And if so, what are the implications?
Well, I think there's 2 things about this story. This is a rebellion delayed, really, from before Christmas, when we had the second reading of the legislation, and there was a huge amount of heat and noise in Westminster, and then no Tory MPs voted against the legislation and a number abstained instead. So we all sort of waited until this moment. Number 10 and the Home Office were negotiating with Tory rebels on the right of the party, trying to get them on side. They wanted the bill toughened up. But the problem for the government was that if they toughened it up too far, then the bigger number of Tory MPs on the centre wing, the left wing of the party, the One Nation wing, would regard it as having breached international law and would vote against it. So they're balancing these 2 different parts of the Conservative Party. And it was always going to be explosive. But I think the key thing is that while today and tomorrow in the Commons, they've been voting, it's called committee stage, voting on a series of amendments to toughen up the bill. That's where the defeats have come. Not the defeats, the rebellions have come, crucially, because Labour voted against the rebellions. The government ended up, the bill remains unamended. And if the bill remains unamended tomorrow as well, as we expect it to, then we have what's called third reading, which is the last Commons hurdle before the bill then goes on to the House of Lords. And that is a different matter. If you speak to some of the Tory rebels today on the right, they suggest that actually they could rebel for third reading, that they are very opposed to the bill because they don't think it will work, rather than the principle of sending people to Rwanda. But only a very small number have actually gone on the record. We're talking about a dozen, maybe a few more. And it would need 29 rebels to vote down,
reminding myself.
to vote against the bill for it to fall. And it's also broader than just a bit of legislation. It actually is potentially existential for the government. If this flagship bit of legislation falls, it's a huge problem for Rishi Sunak. Does it mean another leadership contest or leadership crisis anyway? What does that mean for them? And I think there's a big difference between MPs being prepared, those 60 MPs being prepared to vote for those amendments to toughen up the bill, but then having failed to do that, then going on and bringing down the whole legislation.
Yeah. So, Sebastian, they have their protest, but then they don't want to wobble the foundations to rock either the Prime Minister or, indeed, the prospect of having a general election, because that could follow too, couldn't it, if this bill gets thrown out?
Well, this all comes down to that number, the 29 number. And when this bill went for its second reading, as you said, a lot of people held back their fire. They expressed concerns on TV cameras and Twitter and that sort of thing, but decided ultimately to get behind the bill at that stage. The question now, as we've seen these people showing their concerns about the bill, are they going to pull the whole house of cards down by actually voting against it? And I think, as Pippa has just highlighted, voting against it would be a pretty drastic thing to do at this stage, because it's a massive piece of legislation. It's one of Rishi Sunak's key pledges. And so I think those Conservative rebels will be thinking pretty hard tonight about where they're going to go. And the question this comes down to is the perfect enemy being the enemy of the good in this situation. We saw there's an awful lot during the Brexit war. Back when I was a journalist, and you were there as well, Pippa, and we lived through those endless votes on where Brexit was going and how it looked. And there were lots of people who took an absolutist approach. They wanted their form of Brexit and absolutely nothing else, and were happy to vote against it. And that's how we ended up with Theresa May being pulled down. And on this situation, the fact is, if this bill doesn't pass the third reading tomorrow, that's it. There's no real alternative to this legislation at this point. It is overwhelmingly unlikely. I can't see really what other bill would come back if it's going to be tough or whatever. So at that stage, everything goes into limbo. So the stakes are pretty high going into tomorrow. And I imagine the Prime Minister's team and ministers will be hitting the phones tonight, trying to say to people, look, we understand your concerns. We're going to do everything we can to toughen up this bill. And that's the other thing to watch about what happens between now and the vote. Is there any movement from the government? Can they assuage any of the concerns before it comes to that crunch moment? We're talking about extra 158
judges today to speed up any appeals, but that still makes you realise that the government expects appeals, which is the bit that the rebels are worried about. It's all comes stalling down again because of the appeals process.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that the government is suggesting, neither of which actually fundamentally alter the legislation. One is 150 extra judges. Though, really, interestingly, the Lady Chief Justice Sue Carr said today, she's a senior judge in England, she came out and she criticised the plan, suggesting that it has to be for the judiciary to make decisions about how judges were deployed, and that the government shouldn't be getting involved in areas that were their responsibility. Plus, also, I think, frankly, if the government does decide or does try to move 150 judges over to look at these cases, it begs the question. I mean, you look at the court's backlog at the moment. I mean, some rape cases are taking 5 years to get to trial because of the court's backlog, and there's all sorts of other cases as well. It's a serious problem and I think underlines, for a Prime Minister that presumably wants to be seen as tough on law and order and dealing with the court's backlog, if he shows that his priority is a scheme which lots of people think might not end up actually happening, the Rwanda scheme, then, they may question his priorities in that as well.
So taking a step back, because you mentioned the Brexit votes, many a cold night was spent at Westminster for many of us then. It was hard to see the wood for the trees about the detail at that point. So if we take a step back, why is Rwanda so important? Who's told them they need a deterrent? Is it playing well in the focus groups? Why die on this hill is the question, I suppose.
So this obviously comes back to a fundamental thing with Brexit, which was about control of borders and immigration. That was a clear thing behind the 2016 vote to leave the EU, but then also the 2017 election, the 2019 election, and the 2010 and the 2015 elections. So pretty much every time you've gone to the British people, they've always said they want control of borders, they want to reduce migration. And the big increase in the small boats crossing the English Channel of asylum seekers has created a lot of concern, because obviously the numbers have been particularly high in recent years, but also because it's got to that kind of core sense, does the government have control of the borders? Are people getting what they wanted within the Brexit vote? And people are probably feeling no is the answer. And my think tank Onward did some polling on this, which I'm going to mention just casually here, which shows that 88% of constituencies in this country, 9 out of 10, want control and reduction. And that we asked people what they think the level of net migration is, and the average answer was about 70,000. Last year, it was 670,000. So the perception between where things are and what people think they are is wildly out of kilter. So that brings us to why we're talking about this Rwanda scheme. So this is a scheme that would see...
Well, yeah, you say that, but they can't shout out about how fantastic their legal migration figures are. So this is a brilliant distraction from that, isn't it? Because this is about
part of the same thing. I wouldn't say it's a
illegal
distraction. I'd say it's part of the same conversation. I wouldn't say it's one or the other. They're both part
But
of
the
it.
proportion of this, stop the boats, is tiny compared to the legal migration.
Absolutely, but it still speaks to people, that sense of control. When you break down all types of migration, people feel very strongly they want it all reduced, but that is much more so for illegal migration. So the Rwanda scheme is all about a deterrent to try and stop those small boats from crossing. It's faced numerous legal challenges. We have a bill in front of Parliament which is trying to overrule Supreme Court ruling that said Rwanda is not safe, and it's helpfully called the Safety of Rwanda Bill.
Yeah.
This has become a flashpoint for this issue. Is that a good enough summary? Have I missed anything out?
Before you pick out, we're just getting more papers in. There's the Times then. Sunak hit by resignations and the biggest rebellion yet. Deputy Chairman quit on the eve of key Rwanda vote. We'll come to the significance of that in a minute. The Eye is in, got the Telegraph as well, so let's just see that. It's got the number 60 Tories turn on the Prime Minister in the Rwanda rebellion, and the Eye is just in too, so let's might as well take a look at that as well. We're here. Top Tories quit in protest as Sunak sees off the Rwanda rebels. Sees off for now. That's the point, isn't it, I suppose, until tomorrow. You were going to pick up on what Sebastian was saying, though, I think, Pippa.
Well, I think it's just the key point about the difference between legal and illegal migration, and the fact that while it is true, of course, that lots of people feel very strongly about both of those, they feel more strongly about the big issue of the economy. And I think what has happened is that Rishi Sunak has decided that this is going to be his flagship. This is going to be his moment. I mean, there were moments when he inherited this policy from Boris Johnson and the Liz Truss. He could have said early on, actually, you know what, this isn't going to work. It's going to be too complicated. Let's come up with another scheme. And he didn't. He stuck with it. And it seems to be at a point now where it's like sucking energy out of the government and out of the Conservative Party and not really leaving the bandwidth for them to deal with the biggest issue that people are concerned about, which is the cost of living. Now, their hope, presumably, will be that this all gets resolved and they get the first flight off to Rwanda, and that's very symbolic, before an election. But the odds are 50-50 of that happening, even with an election later this year. The legal advice suggests that. It's got to go through the House of Lords, it's got to go through the courts process because of these individual appeals, as we've said. You know, there's going to be lots of battles ahead on this. And instead, what you end up seeing, once again, is a divided Conservative Party. You know, it's not just the two wings of the Conservative Party, even the right is divided between those that want to hammer Rishi Sunak, and it's all about causing him damage, and those
because
that actually have...
Boris Johnson.
Because he brought down Boris Johnson. And then the slightly larger group that actually has some principled objections to this particular legislation. It's a bad look for the Tory party, for a country that already looks at them and thinks they're more interested in themselves and what's going on internally in the party than they are in addressing the issues.
So the mood music in Downing Street tonight, you know, you've lost your two chairmen out of a number, you know, you've had some of the
Quite a large number.
Quite a large number. I was told 11 last night. Is it 11? Anyway, there's a lot of deputy chairs of the Conservative Party and vices. Anyway, there's lots of them, so do you miss two? But also the names who you've decided to vote with these amendments, you know, Liz Truss, you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg, you know, some of the people you'd expect. In Downing Street, you sitting there worrying? Are you on the phones? How do you handle it?
I think certainly on the phones. I think because obviously it is a massive vote, as we said tomorrow, because it will be a crunch thing and trying to convert that 60-odd number down to, well, below 29, essentially, and making sure that those who voted for the amendments don't go into people who are voting against the legislation. I think, but as I said earlier, I think the question really is going to be, it is a very different order of magnitude to vote down the whole bill than vote for an amendment to try and toughen it up. And the argument is really going to be about the fact that this legislation is tough. There's no doubt about it. I mean, if you look at all the bills that have gone through Parliament over the last 10 years on immigration, this is pretty tough. It doesn't go as far as some of the rebels. It's probably never going to go as far as some of the rebels want to, even if, you know, because as I said, there is a sense that, a bit like Brexit, it's become a loyalty test in a way and has gone beyond the actual purpose, what you're talking about here. And that's obviously always a danger in politics. But as Pippa said, there are many other things going on in the country at the moment. And even in the migration debate, Rwanda is just one part of it as well. So I think everyone would like to sort of get this done, get some flights off, and then go talk about other things. And for the Labour Party, of course, they want to just highlight that they don't think Rwanda is going to work.
OK, and the Express, finally, as well. I mean, you talked about your polling shows how critical it is for members of the public, this, but most people don't follow it in great detail. The end result is they just see a divided party, and as they were told this week, divided parties don't win elections. So there you go. PM's last-ditch plea to rebels come together on the Rwanda plan. So, you know, you know, he's desperate to get it, you know, passed and through and move on, isn't he, I suppose? But hits the laws, of course, after that, Pippa. Just a final quick thought.
Hits the Lords, hits the courts, looks, you know, raises questions about his judgment about using this as his flagship policy. You know, it's a big gamble for him having stuck with it. Currently, it doesn't look particularly like it's one that's going to pay off.
Takes us through to the summer, doesn't it, really? But anyway, here we go. It's only January. Coming up, the European boss of the technology firm at the centre of the post office scandal apologises, discussing that in more detail.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview, joined once again by Pippa Crerar and Sebastian Payne. Welcome back to both of you. Big day for post office evidence today as well. Fujitsu's Europe boss and the head of the post office. And Pippa, some fascinating testimony, an apology, a willingness to understand. He actually started to say the word culp and then said responsibility as well. The idea that they would compensate or share the responsibility to compensate victims. But what did you make of what we heard?
It's very striking. It's Paul Patterson, who's the European boss of Fujitsu, which obviously provided the software to the post office during the Horizon software that is at the heart of the post office scandal. And what was so striking about it is that up until this point, obviously we've had years of obfuscation. In fact, not even that, not even sort of an acknowledgement that anything was wrong. And the reason that these postmasters were prosecuted was because the Post Office and Fujitsu refused to accept that anything was wrong with the software. And then we've got to the point where eventually, because of the campaigning action and the High Court rulings, they had to accept that something was wrong, and they called an inquiry, a public inquiry, which is currently hearing all the evidence and trying to get to the bottom of who knew what and when. But even now, with that inquiry ongoing, in fact, because the inquiry is ongoing, you have answers from the Post Office saying, well, look, obviously, we want all of this information to be out there. We're sorry about the fact that people have had a really difficult time, but, you know, we need to let the inquiry do its work. And so this is why this is surprising, because Fujitsu, up until this point, have been completely silent. Even after the ITV documentary, the ITV drama rather, kind of exploded this all and there's been sort of real public and media attention on it. So it was quite surprising to see Paul Patterson come forward and admit that they were involved from the very start,
and that they had bugs from the very
start in the system from the very start, and that they were aware of it, and that they did help the Post Office in their prosecutions of the postmasters, and saying that he's truly sorry. And I kind of think we were all, I mean, it was the right thing to have done, obviously. I mean, lots of questions about the timing and why now. But even so, you know, that it was surprising. It probably was the right thing for them to do. And crucially, it's not just about words. He also indicated, as the government has suggested, that Fujitsu should pay its share of compensation, a bill which is probably likely to be over £1 billion. The company, over the 25-year contract, I think, has been paid about £2.5 billion. Presumably there's some profit in there. But the fact that he suggested that the company would be willing to contribute, it shouldn't just be the taxpayer.
I know you're desperate to talk about this, but I want to do Trump. So just if you've got something to say on this, just very, very quickly.
I'll wait for Trump.
OK, go for it.
We'll come back to this at the next
OK, right, OK, fine. Anyway, Trump. He did it big. A number of candidates have dropped out. You know, only 3 remaining. Do they drop out quickly? Is it all going to be done and dusted quite fast? What do you think?
Well, this is what the former US president has been trying to say when he's been calling people to come together. That headline once again we've seen everywhere, and I mean his level of victory in Iowa in the caucus is really quite astounding. 98 out of 99 caucuses all voted for President Trump, and he claimed before it was going to be the biggest, the most beautiful win you've ever seen, and that's sort of, I guess, what happened in that case. And you saw Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out, who was an insurgent, had quite a lot of attention, but the 2 other people running in the race, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, they're both in kind of almost joint second place, and they've got similar amounts of votes, but they are so far behind Donald Trump. Now, the next thing will be...
You add their votes together, you know, you start to get into the 40s.
Potentially, but of course, obviously, things are never that straightforward as what would happen. I think the next thing to look at is New Hampshire and to see, does Ron DeSantis gain momentum? If not, it could end rather quickly.
OK, New Hampshire next week, full coverage of that. Thank you, Pippa, Sebastian. We'll see you next hour. To the weather now.